r/no sleep. Hosted by you/02321. Agent in the Woods, Family Ties. Part 1. Last summer my grandfather passed away and I inherited his cabin along with a vast amount of land surrounding it. I planned on finding a job even though I could live comfortable without one for a while. Once winter rolled in, I found it impossible to drive out from the cabin through the snow most days, causing me to abandon the job search. I nearly succumbed to cabin fever in those cold months. The only thing keeping me sane was texting a friend and on the rare occasion meeting him. He was also something I felt like I inherited from my grandfather. He was a contractor that worked mostly for the government to hunt down supernatural creatures. Being a creature himself, he was well suited for the job. I didn't know much about what he was, or even his real age. But whenever I was bored, Thule would send me a few texts vaguely hinting at what kind of interesting job he was currently on. If he was able, we would meet for coffee a few towns over. He didn't want to show his face around the small town because people may clue in that they have seen the same man years ago without aging in the slightest. I surprised him with a Christmas present, however by the time we could meet in person it was well into spring. I brought him a sweater and glove set, feeling it was a lame gift but unable to think of anything else to buy an agent. Every year Thule's family met in the woods for, well, something I was still unsure about. The last time I interrupted their meeting and nearly was killed because of it. I still had nightmares of his brother Hans chasing me through the woods on his hundreds of arms and a wide smile taking up that terrible pale face. I felt a small amount of dread as the date of their meeting started to get closer as the weather warmed up. But I knew it was the one time of the year I was guaranteed to see my friend. As long as I stayed out of the woods, I wouldn't get into any trouble. A month before the meeting something changed my life beyond anything I could ever expect. It was such an important event I didn't feel right sending the news in a text. I wanted to share it with Thule but only told him when we met next, I would have big news. Terrible luck befell me and he found out about what I wanted to tell him in an unplanned way and who he acted in I should have predicted. I was in town by the diner talking with Linda, the teenaged cashier of the grocery store. She often stopped to speak with me and with what I was carrying she just couldn't resist taking the bundle from my arms just as I spotted a black SUV drive down the main street. It parked in front of the bait shop and a few men in suits came out. Around this time of year, they bought out the bait, meat from the grocery store and meals from the diner. When they parked, Derry, the store owner, came out to help load the SUV. I gave them all a wave, unsure if my friend was with the agents working to load up their car. "Aren't you late for soccer practice?" I asked Linda as I turned away from the SUV for a few seconds. "It's too hot. I might skip it." "Do you, know those guys?" she asked, nodding towards the men in black. "One of them," I told her. When I looked over, I saw they nearly had the trunk of the SUV full. They worked fast in pairs. I spotted Thule, who wanted to finish his job before waving back. It was odd he came into town that day after avoiding it for so long. "I gotta go either way. Tell me if you ever need help watching the little guy. I'm really good at it. Almost raised my cousins." Linda smooched the head of who she was holding and handed him back to me. It was only then I realized this was not the way I wanted Thule to find out about my news. I wanted to do this any other way but in watching someone hand me a newborn from across the street. With the duffel bag of baby things hanging from my shoulder, it was clear who the child belonged to. I looked over to my friend to catch him in mid-wave. His hand hovering in the air and body looking as if he froze in mid-step. The other younger-looking agent stared at him for a few seconds then returned to the backseat of the car. It was only the both of us left on the street silently looking at each other, trying to think of a way to approach each other. I started to walk towards him, feeling my heart sink when I saw his expression. A resigned smile came across his face and he turned away. I couldn't find my voice or catch up as I watched my closest friend get into the black SUV and drive away, leaving me unable to explain anything. I couldn't just stand in the street. So, I bought the formula I came into town for and went back to the cabin because Casper was getting fussy in the heat. The moment I had him down for a nap, I sent off rapid texts to my friend praying he would answer at least one. As the day passed and my phone stayed silent, my stress got so bad I was unable to sleep or even eat for 2 days. At that point, I'd only had Casper for a month. But I already knew his routine. At first, I was terrified taking care of a newborn when I had no experience with children, let alone babies. The townsfolk had helped out a lot catching me up and even my sister helped in her own way. I still had yet to see my father or mother after a fight last autumn. But my sister came by to see Casper and was perfect with him. I thought she might be too weird to be trusted around him. All those doubts faded the first few hours she came by and I could take a much needed nap. So much happened in the past month I never thought about how Thule would have reacted to Casper. Casper woke up at 5 a.m. to be fed every day. I was on autopilot making his formula. It was only when I sat down with him in my arms and the bottle in his mouth when I looked at my phone sitting on the table as if I expected a text in that moment. My chest ached over the fear my friend would never send me another message. That he decided it would be best to stay out of my life now that I had a child to raise. I could understand his train of thought. Any time I got too involved in his work I nearly died. Now I needed to stay around because the child in my arms didn't have anyone else. His mother died shortly after he was born and no one else could take him. When I stared at the phone, I could still feel the sensation on the back of my hand when Thule wrote his cell number on it in pen. It felt like such an accomplishment making friends with him, and I ruined it because I decided to go into town that day. I guess it's just me and you, buddy. I told Casper in a soft voice not to startle him while he ate. I felt guilty. That statement upset me. I loved Casper more than I thought possible in such a short amount of time. I was beyond thankful to have him, and yet I was sad because it was just going to be the two of us. I had a perfect and healthy child and people who would help me with any bumps in the road. And yet, the thought of raising him without being able to share the millstones of his life with my friend made my face twist into a sob. Casper never cried after eating, but he did then. I think he was frightened seeing me upset for the first time and didn't know how to handle it. It took me another hour of pacing the cabin with him in my arms and talking to him to calm him down. Instead of waiting on Thule to contact me again, I spent most of the day trying to figure out a plan. He would be in the area somewhere. I needed to find him so we could talk at least once. If he wanted to distance himself afterwards, I wouldn't stop him. The roadblocks were trying to find someone to watch Casper while I was off on my manhunt. And to not put myself in danger. I could not afford going inside the woods with the creatures that lurked in the trees that time of year. No one was available short notice to watch Casper that day, so I stayed home and started to ask my pet questions about what was in the woods. Monkey was a fat creature with many legs along its chunky body. It had raccoon features, such as a tail and ears. His face was human-like and his smile was still creepy as all hell even if I did love him. He could speak a few words and only when he wanted. He was a type of creature that was in the woods and a part of Thule's family even though they were not alike in the slightest. As far as I could tell, there was human agents. Along with the fat sleeping bag-shaped creatures with nubby feet that would take on the features of animals they ate. I may be able to outrun them if I came across those monsters, but I was worried about Hans. He was massive and almost like a centipede but with human arms and a pale human face. He could talk just fine and was the one who nearly ate me last year. If I bumped into him in the woods, I might not be able to escape. Monkey was being very unhelpful. He simply refused to answer what the meeting was for, what other kind of monsters I didn't know about. He only wanted to know when dinner was. I gave up and let him into a bag of dog food I found out that he greatly enjoyed. And it was cheaper than buying him fresh meat all the time. As he ate, I started to make myself a grilled cheese sandwich. Casper was taking a nap upstairs and I had the baby monitor next to me at all times. I rarely was away from him but knew I needed to start distancing myself a little. I couldn't smother the poor child. I was stressed even going to the washroom on my own. Making myself dinner without him in the same room was nearly torture. I was about to rush upstairs to check on him when I heard a knock at the door. People rarely came by without sending a text first. I had no clue who it would be. Setting my dinner aside, I started towards the door, letting myself faintly hope it was my agent friend. When I opened the front door, I saw it was some agents but not Thule. 3 of them stood outside. The third mostly being blocked from sight by the other 2. They looked like Thule in a way. Black hair and similar features. Which was to be expected because they were all brothers. They looked younger than him. One was missing his sunglasses, another didn't have his tie down up correctly. I'd never spoke to any other agent besides Thule and couldn't think of a reason why they would be here. Oh, nice to meet you. You're Thule, I mean, 202's brothers, right? Is everything alright? I asked, suddenly feel concerned. My stomach twisted over the thought something happened to my friend. They looked between each other, then towards the road to see if we were alone. No, but it's going to be. One commented and they all started to move. I was helpless as a hand with a rag was forced over my mouth. They kept my nose free so I wouldn't suffocate and the second man grabbed by around the waist to lift me to drag my body inside. They weren't human and no matter how much I thrashed I couldn't get free from their grip. The last agent made sure to close the door as I was dragged inside the kitchen. They threw me onto a wooden chair at the kitchen table with so much force I thought it was break. The rag still over my mouth, I tried to free myself but no matter how much I pulled I couldn't get him to move his hand away. The second one grabbed my left arm and pinned it onto the table. My heart was beating out of my chest. None of this made any sense. I was promised by their parent that the people in the area was safe unless they went into the woods. When the third placed a black box made of some sort of metal on the table next to my arm, I was too scared to even move. I'd see one of those boxes spilled open before. They held so much gore and blood in such a small space. I didn't know their purpose, but I did not want to be near a dreadful thing. You see, the one holding the rag over my mouth started to speak. I was with 202 yesterday. I don't know what you did to him, but he has not been the same since he looked over to you. I can't forgive that. None of us can. He's the only brother that give a damn about the young ones like us. My head was swimming in panic and fear. If they would just let me speak, I would explain this entire thing. The third agent looked around the kitchen until he found a large carving knife. He handed it to the one who was holding my arm on the table. I jumped when he slammed the blade into the wooden table in between my fingers. I didn't dare move further. I had one arm free but didn't think it could help me in that moment. So, we figured it would be best if he never looked at you again. Don't you think that's a good idea? We need more ingredients for our box, so you'll be a huge help. He sounded a little excited as his brother started to push the box lid open. The lid was only open a little bit. I regretted the fact the rag was not over my nose. A rancid foul smell came from the box and I started to gag into the cloth. The problem is, it's such a small opening. To fit you all inside, we need to do a little at a time. Without giving me any time to mentally prepare myself, the blade came down easily, cutting off my left index finger. I sat in shock and at first not even feeling the pain. Blood pooled and stained the wooden table. A table I knew was in the family for years. Something I thought my father grew up eating dinner at. I mourned the loss of it before my own finger. Reaching over, the agent that had stayed silent the entire time, plucked the severed finger off of the table and dropped it into the box. My free hand flew to the one that was covering my mouth, trying to remove it again. Tears came to my eyes, and to my horror the knife was raised again to take another part of my body off. A sound coming from behind us made us all freeze. A crackling of the baby monitor as Casper cried a little in his sleep. They all turned their heads as they realized what that sound meant. Someone else was in the cabin. That one sound snapped me back to my senses. I was no longer trying to defend my own life, but needed to fight these three for Casper. Snatching the pepper shaker off the table, I was thankful for the loose lid. Before the agent could stop me, I threw the contents over my shoulder and into his face. He let go, the rag dropping into my lap, and he coughed and sputtered. The knife started to come down as I used my free hand to lift the table enough to cause the metal box to become unbalanced. It started to fall off the table and he abandoned me to try and save it before it spilled onto the floor. I snatched up the knife, using my injured hand because it was closer to where it fell. Standing up, I was ready for the third to come at me, but he just stood with a blank expression on his face. When I swung my injured hands, blood droplets flew onto his cheek. I didn't keep my eyes on him as the first agent recovered from the pepper attack. He grabbed me from behind and struggled for the knife. It only lasted a few moments. He paused, still holding me in a death grip, but his attention on the third man frozen in position. The second recovered the box, placing it on the table, and also looked over at the other agent. They could see something wrong, I couldn't. But I could hear it. A cracking sound coming from the agent. As if his bones were shifting under his skin and I simply couldn't see. Hey, are you alright? You're looking kind of. The one who saved the box started to go over to his brother, hands raised as if he was approaching a wild animal. I don't think I can hold my face in, the third said in a soft voice full of fear. He raised a hand to his face to smear the blood droplets on his pale skin. Both of his brothers now froze as if they were unsure of what to do. You should run, the agent told him, brothers, his final words sounding calm. Then, his hands flew to his face as if he was in pain. Soon, I could see why. His skin was cracking open as something else came through. It wasn't just his face. His entire body was cracking and shifting into something else. His shoes ripped to pieces as claws burst through. His fingers cracking and skin falling away to show segmented joints underneath. He was screaming in pain that soon turned into a chattering, clicking noise as his body shifted to something that could no longer form human speech. When he lowered his hands, his face looked almost insect-like. Eyes massive and stretched. Jaws that reached his ears and skin glossy as if it was a shell. Hundreds of razor teeth wasted no time lunging forwards to rip into the second agent's shoulder. I was let go, suddenly not important. All of them were shouting. One in pain and the other begging his brother to turn back into his human form. I could only guess my blood triggered this somehow. Acting on instinct, I ran over to the cupboard. Grabbing a massive box of table salt, I cut it open and threw it as hard as I could into the chaos. It bounced off the creature's face and somehow got his attention. Letting go of his brother, his hand brushed the salt from his face and tasted it. Soon he was on the ground chittering and lapping up what was coming from the box. Monkey loved salt and I made a good guess this creature would as well. It only bought us time. I needed to grab Casper and get the hell out of the cabin before the salt ran out. I ran out of the kitchen, knife still in hand. I heard the other two follow me, but they sounded frightened instead of a threat. I bolted upstairs into my room. I had a crib beside my bed and hoped Casper would forgive me waking him up. The men looked confused over what was going on or if we had a plan. I handed one of them the knife knowing he would no longer use it on me. In a few seconds I had Casper bundled up in blankets that my blood was staining, but I didn't care. Even in my panic was I being as careful as possible with him. He let out a few small sounds from being picked up but quieted down. I thought we had much more time, but when I left the room I stopped in front of the stairs. At the bottom was the monster looking up at us. It let out a screech as it lunged forwards. I wasted no time rushing back into my room. The other two following yet again. I slammed the door, locking it just as I felt the monster throw its entire body against the wooden door. It rattled but stayed. However, the door would not last long. We needed to get out of that room, but our only way was blocked. At least for a few panicked seconds I thought it was our only way out. With blood dripping from his injury, one of the agents started to drag a heavy wooden dresser across the door, hoping it would slow the creature down and if somehow got inside. I ran over to the window and lifted it open with some difficulty. My hand throbbed in pain and Casper started to weakly cry from all the noise. When the uninjured agent saw what I was doing, he came over to get the window open the rest of the way. I was feeling dizzy but forced myself to stay in the moment. If I didn't, then Casper would be in danger. "I need you to take Casper and jump," I told the man in a stern voice. He did a double take between me and the ground below. Without a doubt he could jump from the second floor without any issue. It was being responsible for a child he wasn't able to handle. His face pale from fear and took a step back from me. I can't," he stuttered, no longer looking like the same man who threatened to cut me into pieces. The banging from the door was terrible. Every time I felt like jumping at the sound. My nerves were on fire and I was tempted to slap the man in front of me to get some sense into him. The injured one finished placing everything he could find in front of the door, the knife in his shaking hand. "I'll stay behind. You two get out of here," he told us, but didn't sound brave enough to go through with it. "You're both being stupid. We're all getting out of here," I snapped at them. They both looked startled at my harsh tone. Meekly the other man came over to look out the window as if trying to see how high up we were. "It's not that high. We can all easily jump. Who's first?" he asked, and I was fuming. "I'm human. I would break an ankle jumping from this high up. You two need to catch me and Casper." He looked overly nervous over the plan. I didn't give him a chance to argue it. Because he was already leaning out the window, I kicked his backside to send him out the rest of the way. I can't believe I was almost killed by these three morons. Before the other agent followed behind, I grabbed his tie and pulled him in, nearly choking the man. "If Casper gets hurt, you'll wish you got eaten by your brother. Got it?" A panel from the door was broken in and a clawed hand reached between furniture trying to reach us. I still didn't let go of the agent until he fully understood. I may be human suffering from blood loss, but I could still make his life hell if needed. He gave a small nod, looking as scared as I should feel. Then, I let him go to escape by the window. I didn't fully trust them catching me based on how nervous and fidgety they were. Still, it was our only option. I took a deep breath, and kissed Casper's head for luck before leaping from the window, knocking over both of the men tasked to cushion my fall. I scrambled, making sure my precious bundle was safe. Casper was laughing, fully enjoying the fall. No bumps or scraps on him. But the rest of us weren't doing too hot. My hand still was bothering me. I felt sick and dizzy. If I didn't keep moving, I might not make it. The agent with the injured shoulder also looked as bad as me. His face pale and barely able to stay standing. The other one had twisted his ankle when they poorly caught me and we all fell over. We looked pathetic trying to get to their car as fast as possible. The bastards parked it so far away. Hobbling down the dirt road, we heard a sound coming from the cabin that made us all stop. I pressed Casper protectively to my chest, careful not to hurt him. The creature must have smelled or sensed his meal moving. It crashed through the front door and rolled down the front steps from the momentum. Both agents got in front of me as if they weren't trying to murder me a few minutes before. Neither looked to be in any state to fight off the monster. "We have a problem," the one said, voice shaking. I was tempted to make a smartass remark, but I let him keep going. Looking over his shoulder, his blue eyes full of distress. "He has the car keys." Agent in the Woods, Family Ties. Part 2. My life was going to end because these three were idiots and didn't think of having a second set of car keys. The man with the torn shoulder could still run. At least if two of us stayed and fought, he could make a run for it with Casper. I was about to shove my child into his arms and order him to book it when the monster started to run at us with frightening speed. We wouldn't have time to get away before the chattering thing reached us. My heart felt like it stopped beating and mine froze, unable to think of another plan. Then a booming voice from behind us made all of us jump, even the pale monster skidding to a stop. "What the hell are you three doing?" I knew that voice. And I never knew he could ever sound so angry. I turned, nearly blacking out from the quick movement. My friend came striding over, a rental car parked behind the other agent's car. Julie was so angry he tossed his sunglasses from his face. He wasn't running, but he walked the distance between the car and to the creature before it recovered enough to come after us again. When it returned to its feral state, it attacked Julie, but he was faster. In one swift movement he got it in a headlock. The monster screeching at first. It snapped and tore at his clothing and clawed feet, thrashing. Not only did the minor wounds it inflicted healed, Julie's suit was repairing itself as well. Even in that moment I couldn't help but think how useful something like self-repairing clothing was. It felt like hours that Julie had the creature in a choke hold. When it finally stopped struggling, Julie let it drop from his arms. His steel eyes landing on the other agents. Both men let out a squeak of fear and darted behind me as their older brother started over towards us, looking as if he was going to kill them. If it wasn't for my involuntary actions, he might have. Unable to keep going, my body fell limp and Julie ran over to catch me and Casper before I fell to the ground. When I woke again, my head is still foggy. I sat up, my arms feeling empty. I didn't care about anything besides the fact I wasn't holding Casper. Where's Casper? My voice was weak and somewhat slurred from sleep. I felt a pair of hands start trying to get me to calm down. I shook the cotton from my head to see where I was and what was going on. It looked as if I was in some sort of clinic, or a very small hospital room. White curtains blocked my sight for most of where I was. Julie with me, and the one trying to keep me to stay sitting. "He's fine. The doctor has him. You should rest for a bit longer." He sounded so worried I at first thought something was wrong. Then I realized he was worried about me. He wasn't wearing his jacket and he looked as if he didn't sleep that night. If I was passed out for a while, he most likely hadn't. I still didn't feel right now having Casper in the room, but I looked down to see how badly my hand was damaged. To my shock I saw a full pale finger that was not my own attached to where the other had been severed. Footsteps came from behind the curtain and yet I still jumped when they were pulled aside. A man stood wearing a lab coat over a vest and dress shirt combo. His gold-rimmed glasses made him look like an old European doctor. Julie pulled back when the other man arrived, letting him take over. After some minor vitals were taken as the doctor spoke. "I'm Dr. Philo. I look after supernatural creatures but also take in humans from time to time. You should be fine. I was lucky to have some human blood on hand for a transfusion." He explained, and I thought he looked familiar despite never meeting him before. "My finger was cut off," I stated the obvious. "I replaced it with an artificial one that's basically cosmetic. You won't be able to feel heat or cold, or texture. Only pressure if it's touching something. It may also be hard to bend." He was satisfied over his once-over finding no signs of further trauma. I felt a little sick from not eating and oversleeping, but otherwise felt lucky I was alive. "Artificial? What's it made of?" I asked, and Dr. Philo raised an eyebrow as if he was a little displeased over being asked. "Don't ask questions you don't want the answers for. Anyway, I'll make you some tea." With that haunting statement, he left me and my friend alone. Julie looked ashamed over the fact that his brothers nearly killed me and could not look in my direction. If I didn't start the conversation, one would not happen. At least I didn't think so until he spoke up, still not looking in my direction. "Did you loose a ring when the finger got cut off?" I'm not sure which finger humans wear them on, but if you did, I'll replace it." It appeared as if his littler brothers were not the only dumb ones in his family. He still hadn't checked his phone. If he did, he would have read all the texts I sent explaining everything about Casper. I opened my mouth to speak, but Dr. Philo came back inside holding a tray of tea. He pulled over a small beside table to pour us both a cup. Some small cakes and other treats were on the tray. I knew I needed to eat but couldn't stomach anything yet. "Is Casper here? Can I have him back?" I asked the doctor, who gave me another raised eyebrow. "You really should work on your anxiety whenever you're separated from him. You're the Anderson boy, correct? My cousin is Casper's doctor. He can deal with creatures just fine, but humans are harder for him. He was asking me for advice on how to deal with you." That was why he looked so familiar. Julie looked between us, confused about why Casper would have a doctor who wasn't human. I didn't want to explain it just yet. I knew Dr. Philo was right, that I should be able to deal with Casper being away from me for a few hours, but right then was not the time to tackle my faults. I swear I'm working on it. But right now, I would feel better if I had him. Sighing, the doctor gave in to go get the most well-behaved baby in the world. The moment I had him back in my arms, I was able to get settled in to drink the tea that was handed to me and pick away at a piece of cake. Julie refused the cake and tea, but the doctor loomed over him holding out a plate with a small square of lemon cake until the agent finally gave in and took it. I had a feeling the doctor was one of the rare people who could make Thule give in to his demands. My friend sipped on his tea, wincing at the sweetness. I didn't find it overpowering, but I didn't think Thule had any kind of fondness for sweet things. I already mastered the art of eating and drinking with a child in my arms. We were silent, so I just got something in my stomach before explaining myself. There isn't a ring, you know, I said once Thule finally gave up trying to eat and put his half-finished cake aside. Oh, so you? I mean, that's fine. It happens. Are you friendly with her at least? I mean, how does it work if humans aren't married? I really wanted to let him squirm and keeping digging his own grave with embarrassing questions, but decided it was best if I just got everything out into the open. I put aside my own cup and sat Casper up on my leg, the boy giggling a little. He looked much older than a month. It felt as if he got bigger since I last held him, but it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Casper's mother is Heather Rosewell. I expected Thule to know this girl's name. We didn't know it when we first saw her, but both tried to find anything we could about the poor girl we arrived too late to save. He straightened up hearing her name and looked between me and Casper, almost not believing what he was hearing. Last October I meddled in his job. We came across a beast of a wolf that tried to obtain power but performing a ritual so taboo in their world, that most creatures would not speak about it. The beast bought a human girl and forced himself on her. We couldn't stop him, we only got Casper's mother somewhere safe. For the monster's crime his head was cut off, but somehow, he was still alive, unable to cause any more harm. Casper looked human, but his father wasn't. Then, I don't think I've ever come across a half-breed before. I didn't think they would look so, well, normal. And why do you have him? Was his mother unable to? Well, his questions were understandable. The tribe of wolves that the beast belonged to took in Heather but refused to release any information about her to anyone besides myself. Aside from a name, Thule would know next to nothing. It felt a little strange being the one with answers when I was always asking him questions. It's a little complicated. After what happened, she never woke up. The tribe took her in and kept her alive until Casper was born. Unless the baby is going to endanger the mother's life, they refused to terminate a pregnancy. But after he was born, they didn't know what to do with him. Half-breeds normally take after their mother when they're born. So now a tribe of wolves had this human child with a stained conception, and without any idea of how to raise a human. Thankfully, there is a company run by two girls who place half-breeds and orphan creatures into homes. Thule was listening carefully to what I was saying. He nodded when I mentioned the company that approached me about Casper. Katie Knight and Monty. I've dealt with them before. I used them to place some weaker brothers of mine somewhere else without my parent knowing. I was surprised at first, but thinking back to the 3 younger agents I met, I understood. Those guys would never become agents like Thule. If they tried, they would die quickly. I wondered just how many brothers Thule had saved placing them somewhere else. After all, my raccoon hybrid was also adopted from him. I was a little nervous when they asked. I mean, I've never spent any time alone with kids as an adult, and now I was being offered a baby. But I knew there really wasn't anyone else. His tribe could try raising him, however. I didn't want the fact that his mother was a Harvest Moon ritual victim to hover over his head for the rest of his life. Again, he nodded and leaned back into his chair thinking. I paused to give Casper some kisses, because well, that's just what naturally happened every other hour. He giggled, clearly enjoying the attention. Will you be alright with him? Is he going to get any traits from his father? Thule asked as we both thought back to the beast that took everything we had to take down. No. I hope not. Because there aren't too many half-breeds, not much is known about what gets passed down. From what I've heard, their natures are more fluid based on their environment. Right now, Casper is fully human because I'm raising him. If the tribe took him in, he would slowly become a wolf over time to match his father. But he would be weak and never up to the same strength as the rest of the tribe. I guess if he had mixed parents, he would end up with different quirks, but mostly human looking because of his mother. My nature was to ask questions, and I sure did grill the 2 who let me adopt Casper. They were glad of my interest but started to look tired about me pestering them quickly. In the end, they wrote down everything they could think of and told me to contact them if I had more questions. It took a lot of willpower not to call them up every day to ask them if I was doing alright. Now that I finally told Thule everything about my adopted son, I decided I needed to confront him for nearly ghosting me. Listen, I understand if you don't want to stay in contact. Now that I'll be busy with Casper, most of what I'll talk to you about is going to be related to him. If that's not your thing, that's fine. But just dropping me without a word isn't something I can deal with. Again, Thule looked a bit ashamed of himself. I knew why he wanted to duck out from being friends. He thought I'd moved on. And if he was out of my life, that it would protect me from supernatural threats his friendship brought. I couldn't be going after feral werewolves or dealing with his family with Casper around. If you sent me a message about this, we could have talked about it. I should have disconnected sooner before my 3 idiot brothers tried adding you to their box. He huffed, trying to defend himself. Oh, I'm terribly sorry for not wanting to drop a bomb like this over a text. And I did tell you I had something important to say. You were the one who saw me with a baby and assumed everything would be better without you around. I commented, getting a little heated at the end. You nearly died, he snapped back. Because your brothers care about you. They wanted to kill me because they thought I upset you somehow. If you just came over to talk to me instead of sulking away, those 3 wouldn't have bothered me. Clearly Thule was unaware of the reason why his brothers wanted to kill me. He sat looking stunned for a while before that guilty look fell over his face. It felt as if he now always looking guilty for something around me. I relaxed, knowing shouting would only upset Casper. I really didn't blame him for what happened. There was no way he would have known how his brothers would act. Are we still friends? I asked in a softer tone as Thule rubbed the back of his neck, feeling uncomfortable over the idea that someone might kill for his honor. Yeah. I mean, if you can forgive me. He replied. I can see the reasoning behind why everything happened, so I can forgive all of you. I could have died, but I think those 3 learned their lesson. Plus, if I didn't, who would listen to how worried I am about Casper? He lifted his head, looking confused over what I just said. He looks fine. He replied, but didn't look like the type to really know much about human babies. He is. For now. But I'm raising him. Do you have any idea how stressful of an idea that is? I can't really ask advice from anyone I know about what I should do or handle things. If you just stop talking to me, who am I going to send panic 3 a.m. texts to, dreading the idea of Casper going into 1st grade? Do I even put him in school? Is there a school for half-breeds, or should he go with humans? What if he grows up human but later regrets it? He could have magic skills, and what if I raise that out of him? And how do I address who his father is if he ever asks? Do I lie? Do I tell him what happened? What age should we have the talk with? I'm literally going to explode if I don't have someone to unload these questions on, and my current coping mechanism isn't going to last forever. I was unable to keep my voice steady, and Thule kept glancing towards the door, wondering if he should get the doctor again. What is your current coping mechanism? He asked cautiously. Taking a deep breath, I did what I have been for the past month when things got too overwhelming on my own. I made a ringing sound as if there was a phone nearby. Lifting Casper up, I took his foot and placed it near my ear as if it was the receiver. The moment his little pudgy leg was up, he started to laugh so hard it almost sounded like he was screaming. He was so happy. Hello? Yeah, he's here. I'll tell him. I moved Casper around, so I was speaking into his foot. Then I offered it to Thule. In a dead serious voice, I went on. It's for you. I think it's the president. Casper kept squealing in delight. His favorite thing was me using his little foot as a pretend phone and carrying on ridiculous conversations in the most serious tone I could handle, until I finally broke. This was not something Thule was expecting. He stared at me, unable to react. Finally, a smile came to the corner of his mouth. When he didn't respond, I talked into Casper's foot again. I think he's busy. I can take a message. Thule was cracking. He started to hunch over in his chair, his hands over his mouth, trying to hide the fact he was laughing. I didn't hear anything coming from him, but I saw his shoulders tremble. I kept pressing on as revenge for him nearly ditching me. The president wants you to deal with an army of your nubby raccoon hybrid brothers. They're eating trash and not really causing that much trouble, but they're all really gassy. Still hunched over, averting his face, he lifted a hand and waved it in surrender. I don't think he's ever held in so much laughter before and was in pain from it. A combination of seeing him in such a state and Casper's giggling made me burst out laughing as well. I really hoped I was the only one in this clinic from all the noise we were making. When Dr. Philo pulled back the curtain to see what was going on, it only made us laugh more. Since you're feeling better, I'm sending you home. No sense wasting bed space. I was fine and made no arguments over being kicked out. Thule had to regain his composure. It was difficult with a laughing baby next to him. I shortly found out that Dr. Philo had a skill to create a doorway to anywhere he wanted. He could connect two doors together. Meaning, the one in his clinic could open into my cabin if he wanted. Thule refused and offered us to use his rental car door opening. He was so jumpy about the cabin for some reason. He could barely bring himself to knock on the door. Going inside with me was out of the question. The rental car was fine. It was strange walking through one door only to be climbing out a lower car door at the same time. Agent in the Woods, Family Ties. Part 3. I was told that I'd been asleep for a full day. Being away from Casper for so long horrified me, but I got over it when I saw those 3 agents waiting for us. They were ordered to stay behind to clean up the mess they made at the cabin. The one was still in his insect-like creature form. He was in something looked like a straitjacket and his mouth covered by a clear plastic muzzle. At least he was calm and not in the feral state of mind. They didn't notice us at first. They were outside, 2 of them petting Monkey laying on his back accepting the attention. I suddenly realized that Monkey was the reason why I was still alive. He was told to go get Thule if I was ever in trouble. I didn't see him the entire time those 3 were going to kill me. He must have saw the danger and raced off to get help. He earned those belly rubs and any food he stole while I was gone. Thule returned to his stern agent persona and the 3 straightened up the moment they saw us walking over. Rushing over, their suits a mess, the 2 started to talk over each other, frantic to apologize for what happened. Their brother chirping but unable to speak in any language I could understand. "It's all right. I forgive you," I told the 3 of them, and it was an honest answer. I understood their reaction. If someone made my sister upset, I would consider cutting off a finger or 2. They all looked relieved until Thule spoke, sounding just as angry when he first saw those 3. "It's not all right. Not only did you attack a resident of the town that is off limits, you 3 had a disgrace of a box. 3 of you were given an entire year to fill it. Not only was it half full, you only put roadkill and cake inside. These boxes are meant as first meal for our siblings and you want them to eat that?" His arms were crossed, looking down on them. They all suddenly looked like scared children, even the monstrous creature huddled closer for protection. "I'm going to need to kill you before our parent learns of any of this." Thule sounded so cold I couldn't believe he was the same person who was laughing over Casper's foot phone a little while beforehand. I looked at him, trying to think of anything to talk him out of what he was about to do. My arms were full holding Casper, so I couldn't stop him before he grabbed one of the younger agents. The man let out a small and scared sob but accepted his fate. His insect brother chirped, sounding stressed. I was about to step in, but the one held me back. "It's all right. We deserve this," he said, but couldn't bring himself to look at what Thule was going to do. I wanted to stop this. It didn't seem right in the slightest. So, what if they made a few mistakes? Killing them wasn't the answer. Within a second of getting the shorter man in another headlock, Thule pulled a small switchblade from his pocket. It looked like he was going to cut the man's ear off, but he only dug the blade around for a second and then pulled out a small bloody coin-shaped object from under the agent's skin. Pushing him aside, he took the other that stopped me and did the same to him. When he took another small round metal object from the agent creature, all 3 of them clung to each other as if waiting for death. "There. You 3 are dead," Thule said as he flashed the coins in his hand before crushing them. All 3 let out a yelp of fear and shut their eyes, waiting for something that never came. My own heart was beating so fast I thought I was about to pass out. Finally, one risked opening their eyes to confirm they were all still alive. "We're not. We should be dead. You pulled our numbers out," one of them said in a small voice. "The number chips are a lie I made up. How stupid would it be if we put a massive weak point like that in every agent's head? Something that would kill you if destroyed? But our parent believes it. If I want to fake a death for any of my brothers, all I need to do is remove the chip and show it to our Lord. I swear, I'm the only one using my brain in this family." I wanted to kick him. If he was going to fake their death, he should have at least told me. We thought. That's just cruel," one of the 3 shouted, almost unable to speak clearly. "Cruel like cutting of someone's finger and threatening their child?" That shut them up. Thule's anger faded and now he looked exhausted from dealing with them. "Now I need to figure out where to put you. I don't know what kind of job you 3 would be suited for. I can't really separate you either." "Mailman," the middle one said, and then his face flushed from how excited he sounded. "I mean, the mailmen are always hiring." Thule didn't look very impressed. It was as if he was rewarding their bad behavior with an escape from the family and with a dream job. I looked at the 4 of them, wondering just how many times this had happened. How many agents were out there wishing they were doing anything else but was trapped? Without Thule, none of them would have gained their freedom. When I met his parent, I was able to ask for anything I wanted. And I asked for Thule's freedom only to have him still doing the same job as the rest of them. I now wondered if I asked for something selfish back then. In the car. "We'll talk about it later," he hissed, and they scrambled out of his sight. At that point Casper was getting fussy. We had gone out of his routine and no amount of foot phone would help that. Thule noticed and started to walk away. We never confirmed if we're still going to see each other or not. I told Thule, making him stop. "We are still friends, aren't we?" He replied over his shoulder. That didn't exactly tell me if he would still come by. We could still be friends, and yet he might only send a message once in a while. I knew I was asking a lot of him. He had a job and his entire family to deal with, and I wanted to add my concerns on top of that. Just the thought of how close I'd come to never seeing my closest friend again made me feel more emotional than almost dying. I was really scared, you know. Judging by the look on his face, he knew what kind of emotional stress he put me under. I could forgive my finger being cut off, but not another person cutting themselves out of my life. Clearing my throat, I tried to ignore how upset I just sounded. "Come by tomorrow," I told him. I felt as if I didn't use a demanding tone he would go off and I wouldn't see him again for 6 months. "If I have time." "Make time. Casper has been around for a month. You've missed a lot. I'll go over to your parent and tell them to give you a day off if I have to," I threatened, and he believed me. He was going to protest, but the 3 now ex-agents were getting into trouble. Their brother was getting fussy, and he got out of their grasp to start chasing a squirrel. They ran behind, unable to catch up. "All right, I'll be by tomorrow." With that, he went over to the chaos and easily solved the problem. Scooping the creature under one arm, he went over to his rental car and tossed it in the trunk. The other 2 were shoved in the back seat, and I waited outside long enough to watch them leave. Even though I slept for a day, I was exhausted and Casper needed to be fed. I sent a text to my friend reminding him to drop by the next day and caught a quick nap before Casper needed to be changed. I was only dealing with one baby. I didn't know how Thule dealt with hundreds of troublesome brothers. I was starting to worry that Thule wouldn't be by. Derry came over to fish. He owned the bait shop in town and liked to use my dock. He also knew my grandfather and would often tell me stories about him because I never knew him that well. I set up a blanket on the small sandy shore so me and Casper could hang out as Derry fished. When Thule did come by, it was later in the day. He came around to the lake after I told him where to meet us. He was dressed in a suit, looking like a government goon again. He looked over at Derry, a bit wary of the other man seeing him. As he arrived, Derry started to wade out of the lake. He walked in earlier to cool off his feet while he fished. As he came to shore, he stopped to pet Monkey, who was swimming around in circles. This made Thule freeze mid-step. Derry should not know about anything supernatural, and yet he just acknowledged a creature happily paddling around. "Is this your agent friend?" Derry asked, and Thule looked almost panicked. "Yeah, this is Thule. I think you met him when you were younger," I replied. I reluctantly let Derry take Casper from me. Thule did not look like he enjoyed the conversation. He gave me a "Are you kidding?" look. If we weren't friends, he might have killed me. I trusted Derry to babysit Casper. If I was going to have him over, he was going to see Monkey at some point. And Casper may start displaying some supernatural traits. It was best to be honest with my future babysitters. "Oh. That's right. He knew your grandfather, I think?" Derry said, recalling vague memories. Thule was really going to kill me for this. But then again, did it really matter if Derry knew he wasn't human? What is he going to do? Tell the media, who won't believe a word of it? "Adam, you can't just..." I shushed my agent friend and made a spot for him on the blanket. I'd stopped drinking since getting Casper, but had some juice and snacks. Thule was hesitant, but he sat next to me looking out into the lake, wondering why I called him over that day. Derry talked to Casper and they both went over to a fold-out chair by the start of the lake. I trusted him and knew Derry wanted to get Casper into fishing. I needed to practice letting someone else hold him for a while. They weren't even that far away, but my arms ached wanting to take the child back. Having Thule beside me helped a little. "Did you call me to just hang out?" Thule asked after a while. "Yoop." He looked over, almost not believing my boldness. For all I knew, I could be pulling him from an important part of his job just to sit by the lake for a while. And honestly, I didn't care. He owed me, and that was enough to get him to sit down. "All right, I might have wanted you to give me advice about Casper." I admitted to my other motives. "I don't think I can really help with that." He tucked his sunglasses away as he spoke. "A year ago, we sat by the lake before I knew anything about him. Back then his eyes looked dead. They still looked a little dull, but now they had a hint of a shine to them. It was hard to tell if I was just adjusting to his strange eyes or, since knowing him, they became more alive. I think you're the only one who I can ask about this." "Casper. Isn't human. He looks human though. And it's the same for you. You're the only one in his life that can share the same perspective of looking like you belong in one world but you really are a part of both. I wondered if parents who adopted children from different cultures had my same anxieties. But instead of trying to decide if my child should learn a second language and celebrate different holidays, I had to deal with magic and werewolves. I was so afraid that I did something wrong while raising him. That Casper would become an adult resenting me for my choice of trying to keep elements of his father's traits with him despite the horrible act the beast committed that resulted in Casper being born. If I thought about all the choices too long, my hands would shake and I would get in a loop of overthinking. You think I belong in the human side of things? Thule asked, staring forwards, watching Monkey climb into the sandy shore. The creature shook the lake water from itself and started to dig a nice hole to sit inside. I never considered how distant Thule must feel at times. He looked completely adjusted to human culture. He could order coffee and drive a car. He used phones and knew current memes and media references, some of which thanks to myself. Valak, our mutual werewolf friend, spoke English but didn't have a clue about any of that. I wouldn't have thought that Thule felt just as much as an outsider as Valak. Of course, you belong. You're here, aren't you? I nudged him with my shoulder as punishment for thinking otherwise. We both stayed silent for a long time, just watching the lake. We both had a lot of worries about the future but could put them aside to have a quiet moment. I hadn't slowed down since I first picked up Casper, and I doubted Thule ever slowed down a single time in his entire life. Are you going to stay at the cabin? Thule asked, finally breaking the silence. Yeah. I can't imagine Casper in the city. I think the cabin would be good for him. We can stay away from the woods when your family comes by, but overall, the forest is a great spot for someone like him. Even though what happened to his mother was around her. I think the land is good. I had considered on moving, but every time the thought came across my mind it didn't feel right. In such a short amount of time, the cabin by the lake felt like home. I didn't want to unload so much of my worries on him at once. So, I started to ask questions about his work. Normally he couldn't tell me much, but with the sheer amount of work he did, even vague answers filled up the time. Having someone to spend time with and talk about nothing too important finally got me to relax. I didn't notice how tense I felt until my shoulder finally released that tension. After a while, and to my horror, I nodded off asleep. I think I leaned against his shoulder and passed out, but when I woke up, I was on the blanket with his suit jacket over me. The sun was starting to set and some panic started to sink in when I didn't see Derry or Casper. Just Thule standing by the lake, his shoes off. How long was I out? Where's? About an hour. They're inside the house. Casper is sleeping, Derry is cooking some fish he caught. Thule explained before I freaked out too much. Placing aside his jacket, I walked over to him and stood in the damp sand. Across the lake and in the woods, I saw some flickering of lights signaling his family was setting up for their yearly meeting again. I still didn't know exactly what went on this time of year. No matter how much I pressed, he refused to answer. But somehow, I felt as if I asked now, he might tell me something. What has happened this time of year? I can understand you all meeting, but what's with those creatures like Monkey being in the forest? I asked carefully, wondering if I would get an answer. I think a part of what goes on in these woods is similar to a Kadoku. It's my understanding that is a practice of placing venomous insects inside a jar until they all kill each other besides one. The final product can be used as a curse or medicine. Those creatures, like Monkey, all are unleashed into the forest for 6 days before our meeting. They kill each other and anything they can find. Humans are ingrained in their minds to be off limits, but sometimes accidents happen. It's my job to gather up the survivors so our parent can decide what to do with them. Some get placed inside deceased human bodies to become agents, others are sold as weapons. Thule answered, and I looked from him to the woods beyond. It made my skin crawl a little knowing as we spoke there was an unknown number of those creatures out there fighting to survive. Hearing this, I felt like I understood him a little bit better. He always acted as if he was trying to redeem himself in some way. As if he felt guilty for living. Thule's start in life was killing his siblings. There was a chance that was his motivation, trying to save as many as he could now. You know, it's hard to imagine Monkey being one of the remaining creatures from last year. We both looked over to the fat raccoon creature that had buried himself inside the sand to nap. He made wheezing, snoring sounds, his face looking creepy as all hell, but harmless. When I first started to feed him, he barely could win in a fight with a raccoon. And yet he lived for 6 days in the woods with so many other bigger bloodthirsty brothers. Well, we haven't always used the woods. Because there are more places to hide, some stay alive by pure luck. That explained it. I didn't press on more answers, feeling as if he was done talking about his family wise. My hands started to get the empty feeling from being away from Casper for so long. I needed to distract myself. I found a somewhat flat stone to attempt to skip across the lake. It did a pitiful 2 skips and sank. I swear Derry could skip a rock all the way across the lake, and his method was lost on me. Thule copied me. Finding a decent sized stone, he flicked his wrist and it skipped past the dock. He wasn't showing off, but rather looked like he was testing to see if he could skip a stone. You're not human. That doesn't count. Let me try again. I stayed to look at my feet, trying to find the right stone to at least break my record of 2 skips. It's not because I have superhuman strength. It's just in the wrists. Here, I'll teach you. I accepted his help. For the next 10 minutes he showed me the proper way of skipping rocks. I was starting to get it as he stood behind me to help guide my hand through the motions. With minimal practice I was able to get 3 constant skips. Getting 7 was a proud moment. You don't seem like the type to practice this. Did you need to learn for a job, or did someone teach you? I teased, not expecting the answer I received. My sister taught me. I stood at a loss for words. It was the combination of his hushed tone and the fact he never mentioned having a sister before. The way he spoke made me assume his sister was no longer around. It felt like a topic so off limits not even my nosy self would ask more about. I was rescued from the sullen air when my phone in my pocket started to ring. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered it anyway. I never would have expected someone on the other side asking for Thule, but they referred to him by his code name. It must be one of his brothers, but I didn't have a clue on why they would have my number. It's for you, I told him while placing a hand over the receiver. I'm not available, he answered back coldly. While he was looking for more pebbles to skip, I tried telling the agent on the other end that Thule was busy. I only heard voices begging Hans to settle down and a faint cackling laugh in the background. I looked in the trees where I'd seen the light from before just as the line went dead. I think you're available, I told Thule as I watched a blast of flames shoot hundreds of feet in the air beyond the lake and over the trees. He looked up, spotting the stream of flames turning from orange to purple against the sunset. Face pale, he leapt into action, struggling to get his shoes and socks back on as fast as possible. He was so fast bolting towards the trail that led to the other end of the lake I barely had time to call him back because he forgot his suit jacket. Turning on his heel and kicking up dirt, he raced back towards me. I'd picked it up to offer it to him, and in his haste, he didn't stop in time. We collided and I nearly fell backwards. Derry came down from the cabin to see what we were up to just in time to see Thule holding me in a dip and his hair a mess from running. We both were aware of how it looked, and when Thule brought me in closer so I was no longer in mid-fall, it made it appear even worse. To his credit, Derry didn't comment on what he just walked into. Did I see fire coming from the woods? Derry asked the most pressing question. I'll go deal with that. Grabbing his jacket, Thule ran off, looking a little embarrassed, although not over his brother nearly setting the forest on fire, but for the awkward moment before. I gave a warning look at Derry, almost daring him to say something. He knew better. If he wanted to see Casper again, he would keep his mouth shut. I made dinner for you. Extra because I assumed your friend would be joining, he said while emphasizing the word friend. I gave him a playful punch to the arm as I gathered up the blanket and leftover drinks. Monkey already ate the snacks for me, so I had less stuff to clean up. I honestly didn't know what I would do without all of them. Derry liked to come over to cook dinner for me on occasion. His son, the sheriff, found out about Casper and showed up with a load of baby items. They spent the afternoon building a crib I had trouble with. If my sister wasn't busy, she offered to watch Casper, and Thule was going to stick around to help listen to my worries. Aside from my sister, my family still wasn't speaking with me. It hurt a little, but I found that I could finally handle it now that I had people I cared about supporting me. Agent in the Woods, Family Ties. Part 4. That night I found it hard to sleep. Casper normally was out like a light for a few hours. I should have put him in his room, but I decided to let him sleep in mine in the second crib. I bought one and then my sister got another, not knowing about the first. I should have donated it, but it was nice having the two so I could decide which room for him to sleep in without me needing to drag cribs between them. The usual worries settled in my mind as I stared at the dark ceiling. The meeting in the woods should be over by now. Thule would be packing up the remaining creatures tonight or tomorrow. If it was safe, I wanted to take Casper out for a hike the next day if I wasn't too tired. Anything to keep me out of the cabin and to keep moving to keep the stress at bay. Just as I was falling asleep, I heard a tapping sound. At first, I assumed it was nothing or I was dreaming. When it got louder, I sat up in bed looking towards the window and the source. My heart stopped and my blood froze when a pure white face with a twisted smile was looking back at me. I raced over to pick up Casper, causing him to cry a little from suddenly being woke up. I was backing up, facing the window as multiple hands started to lift it open. This face was a part of my nightmares for months. I never wanted to see it again, let alone have it right outside my bedroom and those terrible hands prying to get inside. "What are you doing here?" I hissed over Casper's weak cries. I sounded equally angry as I was scared. "What a lovely thing you have there. So pudgy and ugly, but in an endearing way. No wonder why my brother was lurking around here today," Hans replied when he managed to get the window open. He tried sticking his face through the opening but found it impossible to fit. The monster was huge. Standing upright, he could easily reach the second floor. His long body lined with human arms from people he devoured. This thing was Tuli's brother but had no reason to be here. He reached an arm through trying to grab us and I backed up even further. "You need to leave," I threatened but had no way to force him. Hans almost looked hurt. His constant smile dropped slightly. When he spoke again it sounded almost human, instead his twisted darker tone. "Human, I am tossing aside my pride to ask something of you. It appears that your kind does things for free if you're asked nicely. It is not in my nature to be so straightforward in my requests, so I came here to ask one thing of you. And possibly sniff the child for a while." His arms struggled to reach us again and I took a few more steps back. "You're not sniffing, Casper, but I'll listen to what you want." He stopped, looking almost disappointed in my answer. He paused, thinking over his words carefully. After all, he came from a world where words and requests could be twisted. "Please speak to my Lord Harvest about 202's freedom. I feel as if your wish has not been fully honored and that is disgraceful to our family's name," Hans said simply. I never would have expected the same creature that gleefully snapped his deadly jaws around his younger brother to also would display any kind of care for him. I thought back to the single time I met their parent and how terrified I was. But I would do what he wanted for my friend. "Your parent's name is Harvest?" It wasn't something I should be concerned about, but found it strange that word had been thrown around a lot regarding Tuli. "Ah yes. Due to that, the stronger agents are called harvestmen. The harvest moon in times of harvest is very important to creatures of the night. It comes up often. But due to my brothers having such a title, whenever a job relating to a harvest comes up, they're the first ones asked. It keeps them busy and is troublesome. I never can see my little brothers. Always off doing something else. I picked humans to eat because I would gain their arms, you know. Perfect for embracing your family." He gave me another smile that took up his entire face and showed off his countless teeth. "You nearly ate Tuli and you want me to believe you love all your siblings and just want to hold them?" I was bouncing Casper slightly to get him quieted down. I was glad babies didn't retain memories because I never wanted him to see Hans. Siblings play rough sometimes. It is not my fault he was not strong enough to fight back. Anyway, I have remained for far too long. Humans are so troublesome to speak with. They go on and on. If you are not going to honor what I am requesting, I'll eat you and take the child. This time he reached a few of his many arms through the window. Those pale hands not able to touch us, but I still started to shake at the sight of them. I brought Casper in closer, not knowing if the monster was joking or not. "I'll do whatever I can for Tuli. You don't need to freak me out," I snapped at him, not knowing where my bravery was coming from. Hans let out a chuckle and brought his hands back outside. Befriending Tuli meant getting mixed up in all sorts of nightmare-inducing things, but I thought it was worth it. At least this request didn't sound dangerous. I would need to speak with a creature that even Hans respected. But I did it once before. "We shall be at the mushroom clearing tomorrow after the high sun. I believe you humans call is 1 in the afternoon. Are you aware of where that is?" I nodded. The mushroom clearing was called that because it was shaped like a cut mushroom. At one point edible ones grew in mass in the clearing, but people kept taking them until they stopped growing in the area. On occasion you could be lucky and find some. I'd done some hiking before adopting Casper and knew the area surrounding the cabin fairly well at that point. I still got lost in the woods if I was in them at night though. Hans was glad I knew and didn't need to guide me to the area. He started to turn away from the window. "At least humans are good for something besides food on occasion." He let out a chuckle and I thought he was gone when he lowered his head. The window was empty for a few seconds, but he peeked back up, staring at me. His eyes squinted. "You promise?" he asked in a soft voice, sounding almost worried. It was so out of character for him I nearly forgot how scared I was. "Pinky promise," I replied on reflex. When I was growing up, if I didn't pinky promise my sister, then it meant nothing. A pinky promise was serious and it meant I would do whatever I could to uphold it. That satisfied the creature, who left peacefully. But not before raising a pale hand with a bent pinky as if confirming our deal. Not in a million years I would ever consider Hans being an alright guy. I still took Casper downstairs so we could both sleep there. I just couldn't fall back asleep with the mental visual of his face in my window. I needed someone to watch Casper when I went out. I wasn't going to bring him to confront a creature of vast power. Derry was busy with the shop and Linda had other plans. I took a chance and called my sister, who was over within the hour as if she had been waiting for the call. She collected him and listened to my instructions she heard 100 times before. She already had plans to take him to an aquarium we both knew he would enjoy. I fully trusted her but still felt the same worry when they went towards the door. While he was still in her arms, I kissed his head and ruffled his soft brown hair. If it wasn't for his blue eyes, we would look alike. No wonder why Thule mistook him for my biological son. I loved him as if he was. More than anything I'd ever cared about in my life. I almost couldn't deal with them leaving the house. But I needed to face a monster for my friend, and that was what I was going to do. When I walked into the forest on a hot summer day, I wasn't aware of the danger that waited me. I was a little afraid of what the day would hold, but somehow, Han's soft tone asking me to confirm the promise kept me walking. We both cared about Thule and I was the only one in a position to help him. I was sweating, but not nearly as much as I expected. Finding the clearing took a while, but I arrived in one piece. At first, I thought I misheard the location. As I walked through the trees, the clearing before me looked empty. It was only when I walked into it that 3 figures became visible. Hans was in the middle speaking to his parent about something when I arrived. Their parent sat on a tree stump and my heart started to beat so hard I thought they could hear it. Lord Harvest didn't look as frightening as Hans, however my body reacted as if I was staring death in the face when my eyes fell on the pale form. Instead of being under the fabric tent, they wore thin layered veils over their face, keeping it hidden. Segmented hands looking as if they belonged to a ball-jointed doll was folded in their lap. Legs with the same joints and clawed feet was crossed over each other. If Lord Harvest had a gender, it was impossible to confirm from their flat chest. A dress of shimmering white fabric clung to. Thule had his back turned to me with a black metal box tucked under his arm. When I walked into the clearing, he turned to face me and his expression turned into such pure terror I've never seen from him before. He was a few feet away. Dropping the box, he made a motion to come towards me, only to have Hans shot forwards to grab him. I let out a sound of shock when the monster took my friend into one of his many hands and slammed Thule's face so hard into the ground I thought I heard bones breaking. I cried out, begging for him to end the assault, confused why he would so such a thing. With a few more violent slams into the ground, Hans raised his brother back up, his blood face covered by the hand holding him off the ground and feet dangling limp. Hans looked as if he enjoyed beating his brother into submission, and it just didn't make sense. He was the one coming to me for help to save his brother. Why harm him so greatly? Hans, that is enough. Lord Harvest's voice was enough to make us both freeze to the spot. My body felt cold and my muscles locked up. Dropping Thule, the monster directed his attention towards me. "Oh, silly little human. You dare violate our precious time with our parent? That is a grave offense. No matter. I've been hungry for your flesh since last year. I think your arms would do nicely on my body, don't you think?" Hans took careful, slow steps in my direction and everything made sense. He lied to me. I felt foolish for falling for his words that night. He didn't want me to save his brother. He just wanted a reason to eat me, and I just gave it to him. I took a step back, trying to think of a way to get out of the situation I walked into, when suddenly my body was jolted into the air. Countless white threads similar to spider web wrapped around me and lifted me off the ground. I dangled with Hans, watching the threads wrapping around me as I struggled trying to get free. I was able to get a cry of fear out before the threads covered my mouth. I could still breathe and see, but could no longer speak. As Hans stated, this is indeed a grave offense. This land does not belong to you. It is a space that belongs to all creatures and not humans. You dare sully this place and our time? Harvest commented, sounding calm, almost as if expecting this. I thrashed, trying to get free, hoping if I could just explain myself, I might get out of this alive. Thule was stirring, so Hans went back to him. He lifted the agent to his knees with a hand under his chin. My friend was struggling back awake. I looked down on him with tears starting to sting my eyes. We were both facing creatures with power far beyond our own. I should have seen this betrayal. Hans was a monster after all. After meeting so many supernatural creatures I cared for, I saw them just as kind as humans. Aside from Casper's father and Lord Harvest, all the monsters were my friends. Even those 3 agents that nearly killed me and cut off my finger. I was going to die and leave Casper alone because of that mistake. Thinking of Casper gave me a burst of strength. I was able to fight through the threads and snap them from my mouth. I would never forgive these creatures if they harmed Casper in any way. That included making him go without his adopted father. The threads started to wrap back around, but I now knew I could break them. "Hans, you bastard. You told me to confront Harvest over not honoring my wish. If anyone should be punished, it should be you, I snapped with as much bile as I could muster. The thread covered my face again, keeping me silent. Their parent turned their head slightly to look over towards Hans, who simply shrugged. Thule was awake and he looked furious. He started to struggle trying to get from his brother's grasp, but the monster was far too strong. If that is the case, I shall lessen your punishment. Instead of letting Hans take your arms, I decided to make you one of us. 202 can cease with his foolish interactions with humans. He shall be able to still care for you without the shame that comes with interacting with your kind. Lord Harvest was still speaking in a calm voice, but I was nearly sick with fear. The threads kept wrapping and moving around. They felt my exposed skin as if looking for something. Deep down I knew that if I let them fully wrap around me, I would no longer be myself. Thule looked as sick as I felt. The wounds on his face nearly healed and he regained his strength enough to nearly get out of the hands holding him back. He snapped, looking at his parent with pure hatred on his face. You find it shameful that I interact with one human and yet you turn your eyes away whenever Hans takes one to bed? I'm sick and tired of how our kind twist words and statements in order to suit their interests. You see humans as below us, but at least they have some honor in their words. I'm certain that whatever wish you promised to Adam, you have done everything you could to not fulfill it. From the way Thule's voice was shaking, it was clear this was the first time he'd ever talked back to his parent. What he said made me stop struggling for a moment. A block of ice settled in my stomach as it started to spread through my body. For the entire year I'd assumed Thule knew what my wish had been. And yet, he didn't know. I never brought it up, feeling as if I said anything it would sound as if I was holding something over his head. I didn't want our friendship being based on some sort of obligation. I simply wanted him to be able to choose what he did in life. The wish of Thule's freedom had been broken from the start because I was too stupid to just talk to him about it. It was silly of a human to waste a wish on you, little brother, Hans said, sneering down. Thule stopped moving, looking up confused at what he meant. Lord Harvest almost looked nervous for a moment. That small interaction proved Thule was the only unaware of what I'd asked for a year ago. He was nearly dead in Hans' mouth while the monster was awake to watch. Soon Thule started to confront his parent, demanding to know what Hans was talking about. The threads had nearly overtaken my face. I pushed my head forwards, shaking it to snap the thin white threads to get my mouth free for a few seconds to speak. I wished for your freedom. For you to be able to choose, I gasped out. My voice was muffled, but enough of the truth was said. Thule looked over to me, face pale, not believing anyone would do such a thing for him. It did not make sense that a human who barely knew him at that point wasted such an important request on a man that was only a number. He shook his head and Hans was laughing over his reaction. I was never told, Thule said while looking over to his parent. The terrible creature that gave him life simply raised a hand under the veil as if it was covering its mouth. From that sheer fabric came a very small, oops. Then the creature threw back its head and laughed. The veil parting enough for me to see a mouth of pointed teeth. How amusing you all are. Going on about the wish being unfulfilled, but I honored it. I may have not told you what that human asked, but I did not give you any jobs this year. I asked nothing of you and let you choose whatever you wanted to do. And my little son, you stayed by my side as it should be. Nothing that human can do shall change that. The pale creature sounded amused over how it thought of a simple way to trick us. If I just brought it up at any time this year, none of this would have happened. I was going to lose my friend and my son because I trusted the wrong creature. Thule looked as if he was blaming himself just as much. He could have gone away at any point but wasn't aware of that fact. Hans and Harvest found both our expressions so amusing they both let out another round of laughter. I could barely stand the sound. I find it so pleasing that little Adam over there even bothered thinking of you after you betrayed his grandfather and stole that wish for yourself. This human is very forgiving. I would have assumed that his family would want revenge on you for that act, my little brother. Hans spoke down to Thule, who looked as if he'd lost any fight in him. It hated seeing him so resigned. When his brother spoke about my grandfather, any life in his eyes completely drained away, making his appear to be a corpse. My grandfather was another topic I never brought up with Thule. I knew it was too raw for him to speak about and never pressed him. I felt a hot rage boil in my stomach. I didn't want to believe my friend would have stolen a wish. Oh, it appears I am not the only one who failed to mention an important detail. Lord Harvest commented, that mouth of horrible teeth curling in a smile. Thule couldn't. Only the one who owns land can make a wish. I was finding it a bit easier to tear through the threads, but sweat was starting to pool on my forehead. I knew I would lose all my energy before my bindings. I heard a horrible cackling laugh once more and Thule couldn't even look in my direction. Hans was practically keeping him on his feet as what shamed the agent the most was spoken out loud. He can use the wish in place of your grandfather if they were married. Harvest's voice felt like a sledgehammer to my chest. I knew they cared for each other but never would have assumed it ever got that far. Deep down I wondered if Thule was using me as a replacement for the man he left. We shared the same name before my grandfather started to go by his middle one. We even looked alike when he was my age. I shook my head trying to clear it of those doubts. Our friendship may have started because of his guilt over the past, but I knew it continued because he saw me as my own person. I was furious that my son married a human. At first it appeared he cared for the thing, but it soon became clear of his cruel he truly could be. That human was infatuated with my top agent. Instead of killing him and being done with it, he lured the human into a marriage. Then he used the wish to ensure that human would never see him again. Oh, it was wonderful. He went so far as to ask me to remove the human's sense of supernatural creatures entirely. I gladly did so. That grandfather of yours lived the rest of his life unable to interact with our kind. We could no longer even touch him. 202 could be right by his side and that human would be completely unaware. Killing him would have been kinder. That laugh that came next turned my nerves to fire. For some reason, Hans did not join in. He was still smiling but it almost looked fake. I thought I saw a hand of his reach around to take his brother's but from where I was suspended, I couldn't really see. Thule hand his back to me, but I knew what his expression was. Sven had once told me Thule would always go for the kindest option not matter how cruel it made him seem. He faked the deaths of his own brothers to give them a better life. And he ensured my grandfather would never be harmed by a supernatural creature again and let him start a family. I was only there because of that decision. I knew he was forgiven long ago for what he'd done but still shouldered the burden. The spider threads were creeping in again. I kept moving my head to snap them but found myself tiring. I might not be able to fight for much longer. I somehow needed to convince Harvest to let me go because Thule looked as if he had nothing left in him. Harvest found the entire scene so hilarious the creature was laughing so hard they nearly fell off the stump. When they finally calmed down, they opened their arms expecting. Oh, my little son, you are almost not a failure. You may not be female as I desired, but have done well enough to amuse me this greatly. I shall give you an embrace for your treatment of these humans. The one that interrupted our meeting is soon going to be a part of our family. Now, come over here and receive some of my love. Lord Harvest stood up, but those clawed feet hover slightly over the ground. They were a creature that would not dirty their feet from walking like the rest of us. I felt sick again, my entire body feeling scrambled. I needed to think of a way out of this but my brain refused to form any thoughts. Hans let go of his brother but leaned over to speak with him. Go over to our parent. I think you can still save your human if you argue a little. Perhaps this is time to show that true face of yours, Hans said in a low voice and pushed Thule forward with one hand. If Harvest heard what was said, it didn't react. They only remained with arms out for their son. Thule looked over, a horrible realization coming over his face. Those two had a plan I couldn't even begin to be aware of. That one look gave me a small sliver of hope. The thread started to overtake half my face but I could watch what was happening. Thule started to walk towards his parent and each step away from me felt like a blow. I knew he wasn't going to leave me, but it didn't feel right that he would just accept his parents' embrace after everything. I almost felt abandoned in that moment. Someone came for me and it was not the one I ever expected. Hans glided his body over and practically slid up the tree to where I was trapped. Those awful hands of his wrapped around me and I started to struggle again trying to escape him. I didn't trust him in the slightest. A pair of hands came over my mouth and my skin crawled. Expecting him to smother me, he did something else. Keeping one hand over the other he tore at the threads over my mouth. I felt other hands quickly and carefully pulling at the other threads as he stared forwards hoping no attention was on what he was doing. Hans? I asked in a small and he shushed me. The monster didn't look at me as he worked away trying to free me and not make it obvious. My gaze went back over to Thule just as he stopped in front of his parent. What happened next was finished in a blink of an eye and my brain couldn't register the movement. Thule's back was to me, but I still could see his face changed. It was as white as Harvest. I thought I saw glimmering eyes and a set of jaw far too large to fit on a human face. He snapped forward with his true face exposed and suddenly half of his parent's face was gone. It took me a moment to realize that Thule had bitten it off. Harvest took even longer to notice they were now missing the left side of their face above their cheekbone. The veils fluttered down giving me a first look of what their parent looked like. And I was shocked to see a beautiful and yet, almost childlike face under the fabric that was drifting towards the ground. No blood came from the wound and not even their smile faltered as the creature's body started to fall back with arms still outstretched and expecting. The body didn't even hit the ground as Hans doubled his effort swearing trying to tear away the threads. I soon knew why he was so frantic. Monkey became a half raccoon hybrid because he'd eaten a rabid raccoon. I'd seen another creature turn into something deer-like from devouring a deer. So, I knew their family gained traits from what they ate. But wasn't aware that fact applied to the human-shaped agents. Thule hunched over, hand over his now human mouth, looking as if he was going to be sick. He did just eat part of his parent after all. The flesh on his hands started to flake away, exposing what looked to be segmented joints underneath. The black started to fade from his hair. The scars along his face start to move along the edges as if there was something under the skin trying to break free. I felt the last of the threads get torn from my body just before Hans curled himself around me. A blinding flash of white overtook my vision and I couldn't sense anything. I could only see a burning white and a slight ringing in my ears before a darkness, thankfully, overtook me. Agent in the Woods, Family Ties. Final. When I woke, I was confused on what just happened. Slowly I came out of the darkness to my entire body throbbing in pain. My feet dangled and I was hanging by my shirt that'd been caught on a branch, slowly ripping. The sound and the descent was what woke me. I was too groggy and sore to do anything but let my body drop. Hands caught me and guided me down to the ground. I couldn't even keep my eyes open until I was safely on the grass. My ribs felt as if a few were broken. Breathing was painful, but the ache in my head was clearing up. Forcing myself to sit up, I looked around to see myself in a world of overturned trees of pure white. It looked as if a bomb went over and bleached all the colors from around me. And the fading colors was slowly creeping along deeper into the forest. Hans was curled up at the foot of the tree I'd dropped from. Not only did he protect me at the cost of nearly half his arms, he used his broken and injured ones to get me safely from out of the tree. I didn't understand his actions. He was the one who tricked me into nearly getting killed in the first place. While I sat looking at his torn and injured body, it all clicked. Hans was being completely honest with me that night. He knew the risk of my life when he asked me to confront their parent. While we were in the clearing, he guided the conversation along so everything would be revealed without any of us being aware of it. All because he watched his younger brothers suffer for so long. He couldn't stand watching Thule be under their parents' thumb any longer and forced a confirmation. I didn't think he cared too much if I died or not. Only that things finally got resolved. He opened his eyes to look over at me but was too weak to sit up. His body was torn and I found myself getting choked up over this monster. He could only lift one hand to place on my head in a kind gesture I didn't think this creature would ever give a human. "Please. Go save my brother." His hand dropped and eyes closed. It didn't appear as if he was breathing, but I'd seen a wolf get his head cut off and still live. I needed to believe that Hans would be alright. My chest burned from standing up and I nearly fell back over. After everything Hans sacrificed, the least I could do was walk forwards. I clutched my ribs, taking it one step at a time. I needed to walk around to go slowly over fallen trees. Everything was so white I wondered what happened. I considered the idea that Thule's body couldn't handle the change from eating a part of his parent and did all this damage. But what did that mean for him? Was he still alive? Was he alright? Was he still the same person? I couldn't keep these thoughts and worries from my mind. Another set of worries came to me as I walked further to where I thought my friend was. The white trees grew more and more brittle. They crumbled if I brushed against them. Whatever did this was spreading. If I didn't stop it at the source, I didn't know if it would. What happened to the town nearby? A sound of fabric flapping in the wind made me know I was on the right track. I needed to take breaks because of the pain in my ribs, but I still pressed on, feeling as if tears would cease my progress at any moment. When I finally found the clearing again, I didn't recognize the flattened white ground, or my friend in the middle. Lord Harvest remind where they fell, half their face still missing. Thule was standing with the wind swirling around him, flapping his still black suit jacket. His suit was the only dark shade in the area. Over his face was sheer layers of fabric being blown up into the sky from the never-ending wind. It clung to his face, making the curves of it be visible, but it just didn't look like him. He looked as monstrous as his parent was. I stood, hand wrapped around my sore ribs, not being able to get any closer because of the wind. I didn't know what to do. I was only human after all. Thule had taken a part of his parent who I assumed was a monster far beyond anything I could ever understand. Something godly, and I felt so beneath them. What could I even do? If I didn't think of something, this world would be in danger. I thought of Casper and took a step forward into the wind that nearly forced me back. I was slammed with emotions that weren't my own. The guilt of being alive and wanting everything to end. I thought I heard Casper's voices and the sound of other names I knew. These were faint hints of Thule's thoughts through the sound of the fabric and the wind. The power he gained pressed on him, trying to ruin the world and use his own negative emotions against him. He was fighting back, thinking about what was still good in his world. I found my voice and called out to him, one hand raised trying to block out the wind. I thought I would need to fight on to reach him. This was almost the end of the world after all. But somehow, his name reached his ears. The wind started to die down as he turned his fabric-covered face in my direction. Reaching up with strangely jointed hands, he grabbed the sheer shimmering fabric, pulling it away and gasping for air. As he did, it disintegrated, leaving no trace behind. His body now void of color. Hair pure white along with his eyes. His pupils black, but even his lips looked a pale white. At first, he didn't notice me. He looked at his own hands, confused over the change. When he looked up and saw me a few feet away, he forgot everything else. Running over, he slipped his jacket off and wrapped it over my shoulders the moment he stopped. His hands flew, trying to brush away any remaining threads and to check for injuries. He looked too panicked to even speak. Placing both hands on my cheeks, he lifted my head, gently moving it from side to side, seeing if I was all in one piece. "I thought I killed you," I admitted, his voice full of tears. When he leaned down to quickly give me a thankful kiss that I was still alive, neither of us even realized what he just did because it felt like a natural reaction at the time. My face was still in his hands for a few seconds after he pulled his face away. My painful ribs were forgotten for a moment as my face flushed. "Did you just?" I asked, unable to speak. He looked confused again. When his actions finally sunk in, he dropped his hands and took a few steps back in sheer horror over what he just did. It looked as if he just killed me instead of finally showing how he truly felt. His hands flew over his mouth, expecting me to be angry. Instead, I took a painful step towards him, tears in my eyes. After everything, I couldn't stand him being so far away. Even if it was only a step away. Thankfully, he understood and wrapped his arms around me. It hurt being held so tightly, but I didn't care. Because it was a comforting pain. Thule rested his head on top of mine, repeating how sorry he was. I wondered if those apologies were for me, or for my grandfather. I was glad to inherit them because the man was no longer around to hear his words. Was stayed like that for a while as I reflected on how dense I'd been. Somehow even a slow wolf like Valak knew my own feelings before I was aware of them. If I just was honest with myself about how I cared about Thule, we might not have gone through all of this. Movement made me lift my head and Thule reluctantly followed my gaze. Harvest twitched and slowly started to sit up with jittering motions. They couldn't stand standing and kept falling back to their knees. The massive head wound slowly starting to close up by the flesh squirming around the edges to reform that childish face. A smile was hovering on their lips as the creature noticed us. "My little one. I never expected this. How good of you. I think I can come to love you the same way I did your sister. Now come over here. I'll even let you keep your human if you like." Any power that voice held was gone. It looked and sounded pitiful, unable to stand but still weakly outstretched their arms, expecting Thule to come to them. As much as I hated that creature for what it's done, I felt myself having a wave of sympathy for it. Harvest was unable to grasp the painful idea of their child abandoning them. I don't know how I would handle it if Casper grew up and left me in the same way. I felt myself feeling sorry for the creature because their arms were empty and mine weren't. Thule made no motion to go over to his parent. But the expression on his face was one of agony over how his parents still cared for him. After everything, they were still deeply connected and I wasn't upset over that. "I'm leaving," Thule told the creature. "You cannot. You still love me after all, so come here." Beckoning him again, Harvest's face slowly started to fall as Thule gave a small shake of his head. "I do. You're my parent after all, but I'm still leaving." Those two facts did not make any sense to the creature before us. Neither could be true at the same time. Horror slowly started to take over them as Harvest tried to stand again only to fail. "No. I don't. You cannot. I can accept my children dying, but I cannot accept being abandoned. It's not natural. Please, don't leave me. Not like your sister." The voice and pleadings came out hoarse. I gripped Thule tighter, not knowing how he could deal with such a sight. He needed to look away, unable to see his parent in such a dreadful state and knowing he was responsible. A thankful distraction in the form of Hans interrupted the scene. A few arms missing, so his movements weren't as fluid as before. The injured parts of his body were flaking off, revealing pristine hard body underneath. The blackness reflected countless colors in the sunlight. I thought the jerk was dead, but he was just molting away the harm done. The creature gave us a short look with a real smile on his face. He continued to go over to Harvest, trying to comfort the creature. Telling it that Thule was in fact leaving and that wasn't the end of the world. The remaining arms wrapping around the monster I'd feared before but now looked so small. I still thought Hans was a bastard but used that word as affectionately as possible. Thule supported me as we started to turn away from his family. Lord Harvest let out a sob of dismay. We walked towards the cabin and in the direction of home, Those faint sobs seemed to follow behind us for a long while. As we walked, the whiteness started to fade into a scorched blackness. It looked as if a forest fire tore through the area, not leaving a tree standing. We hobbled along looking as if we could barely stay upright. Slowly we made our way out of the destroyed area into the normal forest. The sky orange with the setting sun and hot wind blowing through the trees. I appeared as if it was a just summer evening. To the both of us, everything was different. We started to walk up to the dirt road leading to the cabin, still needing to hold on to each other. Monkey spotted us. He looked worried and started to circle around our feet, crying out we were hurt. Julie helped me up the stairs and paused at the front door. "I help," Monkey said in his little voice. He easily found the key I'd hidden under a fake rock. Standing on his back feet, he reached up and unlocked the front door for us. I gave his head a pet, which he looked like he enjoyed, and thanked the small creature. This time I was the one who helped Tuli through the threshold. I nearly dragged him forwards as Monkey raced to the kitchen, knowing he now could eat anything he wanted without punishment for his good deed. Tuli set me on the couch so he could look over how hurt I'd gotten. Considering how we clung to each other the walk through the woods, him lifting my shirt to run his hand over my chest to test to see if anything was broken might have been an imamate action if we weren't so exhausted to think about it. My ribs were only bruised and not broken. It didn't make me feel better in the slightest, knowing the damage wasn't as bad as it could have been. It hurt like hell, but manageable. He went into the kitchen to find an ice pack and some aspirins because it was the only thing on hand. When I was settled and an ice pack pressed to my sore chest, he finally paused to look at where he was standing. It appeared as if he was finally seeing the place for the first time after avoiding it for longer than I'd been alive. He placed a hand on a wooden side table, looking at the marks in the surface. My grandfather raised a family in this cabin. My father moved to the city when he was able, but there was still such a large amount of history within those walls. "So, you and my grandfather, huh?" I said, finally snapping him from his trance. His pure white face flushed slightly and he turned away. "Yes. Something like that," he admitted, looking embarrassed. "I may tell you the entire story someday, but the short answer is he cared about me. I did as well, but in a different way, and I humored his feelings. I did not see him in the same way I care about you." We both needed to pause and look at anything but each other. We looked like a pair of teenagers going on their first prom. Faces red, unable to make eye contact. Clearing my throat, I spoke, trying to stay on topic. I didn't think men could get married back then. It was not a human marriage. My parent created a binding set of vows because Hans asked. He has a bad habit of picking up humans to use. He feels as if it means a little bit more if he marries them before eating them. Romantic in his eyes. Putting aside the horror that came with the thought of anyone agreeing to marry Hans, I desperately wanted to know what kind of vows Lord Harvest thought of. After all, they had come up with a very creative names such as Hans, because of his many hands and 202. Seeing my expression, Tuli raised an eyebrow. "You want to know what the marriage entails, don't you?" he asked, and I nodded my head. With a sigh he went on. "It's simple. You both repeat these words and you're married. I believe it goes there are no favors or debts between the two of us. Until we both die, everything I am belongs to you." So, it wasn't as uncreative as I thought. An understandable set of statements from a creature that comes from a world that based their currency in favors. I still wanted to mock them though. "I can understand that there are no debts or favors between the two of us idea. I mean, not even your names are free in your world. But don't you think the until we both die, everything I am belong to you is too? Well, thoughtful for you, parent, to think of?" I asked, shifting the ice pack and wincing a little in pain. "I think Hans made up that part. He reads a lot of trashy romance books." I held back a laugh, knowing that would just hurt more. Everything I learned about his older brother was something I never expected to hear. Suddenly getting serious, Tuli came over to me. He was standing while I sat on the couch, so he held out his hand for me to take. "Are you going to stay here?" he asked softly. After everything, the best idea was to move. I shook my head. "Am I in danger if I stay?" I asked, wondering if his parent would take revenge for stealing away their son. "No, I doubt it. When I took a part of my parents' power, I also took something else. Every creature has a true name that is born with them. It is never spoken out loud unless to someone who they trust beyond anything else. If you know a creature's true name, you can order them to do anything. It is a binding thing. I know only a part of my parents' name, but that is enough. If Harvest is anything to you, they know I'll reveal that to their enemies. It is enough to ruin them. My parent no longer holds any power over me." I was relieved hearing that. Not only was I no longer in danger, but Tuli truly was free. I gave his hand a squeeze to gather up my courage to ask him an important question. Do you want to stay here with me? I felt my face get hot but kept going, knowing that I stopped I wouldn't start again. I think it would be good for you. I know you still care about your brothers and want to watch over them. If you stay here, you can and well. You love your parent. You don't need to do what they say, but seeing them once a year wouldn't be too bad, right? I think. It might be too painful if you just cut your entirely family out from your life. He looked ashamed over the truth. After everything his family put him through, he still would regret never seeing them again. I understood that. I still loved my father and wanted him to reconnect after he made it clear that money was more important than his son. Tuli looked as if he was debating his answer when a noise at the front door made us jump. It was a loud knock, then the doorbell ringing, and something that was almost a song. "Oh, that's my sister with Casper. Help me up," I asked, and Tuli needed to keep an arm around my waist so we could start walking towards the door. "I warn you, she's a bit weird." He nearly rolled his eyes. My sister is human, and after everything he's dealt with on a daily basis, he didn't think a normal person would faze him in the slightest. He was proven wrong moments after we opened the door. My sister had a terrible fashion sense. Her outfit cobbled together from different eras and clashing colors. Countless bracelets on her arms clacked together when she tossed Casper's baby bag into my arms. She then handed Casper to Tuli, who would have refused if she didn't literally dump the boy into his arms. I knew she would never drop Casper if Tuli didn't take him, but he didn't know that. He held the boy, stunned over suddenly holding a baby. "Darlings. So good to see you." Casper was a perfect little munchkin. I really need to find me one of those. Her voice was a little grating to anyone who didn't grow up with her. She picked up a mixture of accents on her day out, and I honestly gave up trying to figure out why she spoke so strangely. "Angela, where's his binky?" I was digging through the bag trying to find Casper's blue pacifier because I could tell from the look on his face, he was a few minutes from a meltdown. "It's in there." She paused to brush some of the white threads from my clothing, which I didn't have an explanation for. She didn't dwell on them or how odd we both looked. "Anywoo, my flight is in 4 hours, got a jet. Going to see the meow meow riddle cat thing." Tuli gave me a raised eyebrow, not understanding what she was talking about. "It's called the Sphinx. Don't give it weird name. How much junk did you buy today?" It looked like she bought every tacky keyring at the gift shop. All had names, but neither of us knew anyone with them. Knowing her, she bought the keyrings because she liked the fish on them, then forgot she even got them. Again, Tuli gave me a look, unable to believe my sister turned out so weird and I relatively normal when there was only a year age difference between us. Considering all the things she'd done in the past, calling the Sphinx a meow meow riddle cat was almost normal for her. "You kids have fun." She grabbed my face to kiss my cheek. I tried to ignore it to keep looking through the bag. She'd long since stopped kissing family on the mouth, but I'd forgotten that she kissed strangers without a second thought. She grabbed Tuli's face to kiss him and needed to stand on her tiptoes. To his credit, he didn't look offended. Just confused. Casper got one final kiss and my odd sister was off to do whatever it was she did. In the short interaction, the agent beside me looked more flustered by a single person than by feral werewolves. We stayed in the doorway, Tuli debating all the choices in his life leading up to that moment, and I was still looking through the bag. "Could you take him?" Tuli asked a few minutes after my sister left. I didn't even look up at him. I'd started to dump junk out of the bag and on the floor. I was frustrated because I told her the blue binky always went into the front pocket because it was Casper's favorite. He used it the most and it should never be buried under her impulse purchases. "1 second. I told him, not aware of his strained tone at first. "Please?" He asked again, and this time I looked up because of how distraught he sounded. He was holding Casper awkwardly as if he didn't want the boy in his arms. He couldn't even look down at the child wiggling around, hands out trying to grab a hold of him. By some miracle I found the blue pacifier and gave it to Casper, but didn't take him from Tuli. "He's just a baby. I don't know why you're so freaked out," I told him, wondering why he was having such an emotional response. "I don't deserve to hold him. I didn't save him, mother," he admitted, sounding bitter over how we all arrived too late to save Casper's mother. His reaction made sense to me. If he didn't agree to let me help on the Harvest Moon Fever job, then he would have not asked the question that led us to being aware there was a victim in the woods. But, if we didn't get there when we did, she would have died and Casper would have never been born. "No, but you saved him," I corrected. He looked down at me as if he never considered that line of thought. Letting himself look down at Casper, he shifted the boy in his arms so he was holding him more like a baby and not like a burden. Casper was reaching out trying to grab something. His little hands fell on Tuli's tie that somehow made it through our entire ordeal. He tugged at it and the agent looked down at the child as if he was seeing him for the first time. I could offer to take Casper but knew that Tuli now didn't want to give him up just yet. I don't want to force you into anything if you're not ready, but you can stay here with us if you want. It's all up to you. For the first time in his life, there was choices for his future. He could finally do anything he wanted and wasn't sure how to deal with such a thing. He looked overwhelmed over the thought. I reached over to let Casper take my hand as he kept tugging at the tie with his other pudgy little fingers. Julie started not finding any words for me. No pressure or anything. But I would prefer if you stayed. I don't want Casper going through his parents divorcing when he's so young. Julie looked over at me choking and sputtering. His arms dipped a little in shock, but he recovered, lifting Casper back up. The boy thought it was fun and giggled through his pacifier. Divorce? His voice was barely a croak. We're not. We didn't. Finally, he clued in. I let myself give him a mischievous smile. After spending so much with supernatural creatures, their talent of twisting words to trick each other was rubbing off on me. In his family, marriage was only needing to repeat those vows back to each other. And I sneakily did that without him noticing. He didn't need to honor the little trick, but I still found it funny. You sneaky little. He sounded angry with his first word, but soon his voice became thick with tears. Unable to stay standing, he started to hunch over with Casper still in his arms. I went down with him, hand on his back and supporting my child in the other. He raised a hand over his eyes, trying to hit how wet they gotten. When he couldn't blink them away, he started to try and rub the tears from his eyes. I can really stay here? He asked, and it sounded as if that question was for himself. A day ago, he never would have thought being able to choose his own life would ever be an option. Now he had a family of his own ready and waiting. I stayed beside him, letting him take all the time he needed. It was such a huge change, he may take a few days for everything to fully sink in. You know, I took your advice in the end, I said, not being able to stop myself. You have never once listened to anything I've said. He argued, but with a hint of a playful tone behind his tears. You told me to go off and get married. That is exactly what I did. If he wasn't holding Casper and in a better state, he would have kicked me. I started to laugh at the expression he shot in my direction. Casper started laughing because he heard my voice, and soon Thule couldn't help himself. Still trying to rub his eyes, all three of us sat at the front door laughing like idiots about how things just fell into place. I didn't know if my grandfather planned for any of this when he asked me to look over the cabin for him. His only goal may have just been me befriending the odd agent in the woods. I honestly never expected that accepting the cabin would lead to getting tossed in the middle of a completely different world full of monsters and nightmares. I chose to remain in that world and gained a family because of it. No matter what other supernatural threat, or whatever life path Thule ended up choosing, I knew we would be together to face it.